Hey everyone, this is the Nomading AMA, and this question comes from Dave Quint. Dave asked, what are the top three things about nomading that regular non nomadic folks just have no clue about? And this was actually easy because Adrienne and I, she doesn't like being on camera usually, but we came up with about 30 because people don't understand what this is about. But we narrowed it down to three because that was the question. All right, number one, it's not expensive. And now let me rephrase that. If you won the lottery or you have a trust fund, this can be incredibly expensive. But it's just like life. Life can be anywhere from inexpensive to expensive depending on how you live your life or what you can afford to do. The first mistake people make is that I think they take the cost of their 2 week vacation and then multiply it by 26, add it to the rest of their life expenses, and are like, oh my God, that is so far out of reach. Uh, that's a mistake because there's two problems with that logic. Number one is when you take a vacation, you basically have all of your life expenses still happening while you're on vacation. So even though you're on vacation for 2 weeks, you're still having to pay mortgage those 2 weeks. You're still having to pay all the other expenses, including probably house sitting and other things. So the vacation is an additional expense. Whereas when you're nomading, yes, you have to pay for hotels and lodging, but over here you're not paying for your mortgage. And yes, you pay for more in gas, but you're not having to pay an electrical bill, right? So you're just transferring life expenses into different areas. You're not necessarily adding expenses. So it's not more expensive, it's just life. Life costs money. It doesn't have to be more. The other thing is when you go on vacation, you're probably spending money far faster. You worked really hard the last 50 weeks. You're going to go see the Broadway musical. You're going to go out to the nice dinner. You're probably going to stay at a nicer hotel than you would if you were doing this 365 days a year. That's not probably going to be what your nomading expenses are. By the way, we'll go into there were other questions all about making money while traveling. That's a whole separate topic, so we'll get into that. But it's not expensive where it doesn't have to be. Actually, let me add to that. Adriana traveled for 7 years in an RV where she actually just drove from town to town and looked for work in the town she was at. And she homeschooled her kid while traveling around the country. A lot of times she would park the RV like at an RV park where you can then plug in and use the facilities and the water and electric and the space in exchange for doing work there in addition to the work she found. So she did this on an absolute hand to mouth shoestring and had a great experience. And I toured for years and I couch surfed or floor surfed, which is more often than the couches. Uh, Now, I was networked to a community of people within my industry that I could stay with, but there are websites for people that just want to couch surf or people that put up their driveways to park your RV in. Uh, Certainly, if you're like a single woman traveling alone, maybe there's challenges to like couch surfing in a stranger's house. Like, I get that. But no matter what the situation, there are hurdles to overcome. But the point is, it doesn't have to be expensive. Okay, the second thing, this is a big one. Everybody thinks this is a trip. Like, how's the trip going? Like, I think a lot of people don't get that this is not a trip. This is not. There's not an end in like an end game. Like, this is just how we live. You live in a apartment on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. We live in a hotel that we're in tonight while we travel. It's just a way of living. People always ask us how the trip's going. It's like it's not a trip. In fact, this is a really common exchange. This happens actually all the time. Someone will say, "So where do you live?" Well, we don't live anywhere. We just travel. And they go, "Okay, where's your home base?" We don't have a home base. It's like, we have to have a home. You have to get your mail somewhere. It's like, yeah, we get our mail somewhere, but we haven't been there in years and have no plans to go there. So yes, we have an address to get mail. It's not a home base. It's like, okay, fine. Where do you store your stuff? No, we don't have stuff. We don't have a storage unit. We don't have a box of stuff at our parents' house. Like everything we own is with us. Aside from my work stuff, my discs and merchandise or whatever, when I'm doing my job, everything we own's in 2 backpacks. Everything. Like, so we don't have a. And actually, they usually follow up. The final question is something like, okay, well, when you're done with this thing, where are you going to call home? Like, where are you going to land? Like, we don't plan on stopping. And I usually at that point we get a look like, okay, fine. If you don't want to answer my questions, or like if you're going to be snarky, it's like, right, we're not snark. Like this is we. It's just the inability to get the fact that this is a way to live, to just go. All right. I think here's probably aside from money, this question, or this is the misunderstanding that is probably the biggest barrier to people actually living a nomadic lifestyle. But yeah, and money's a big one. We'll get to that in other videos. But they think you need to be prepared for everything, or they don't think you can solve things as you go. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten the question, well, what happens if you need a doctor? You go to a doctor. It's not like that next town over doesn't have like Western medicine, right? It's like, well, what if you run out of razors? You go to the store. Well, what happens if you need this? You buy it. What happens if you need that? It's like everything that you have in your hometown exists in the next town. Now, I get you're in a village in sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe there's not certain luxuries you have in the West, right? But then you live without them, right? That's the other thing. You can just live without stuff. The barrier, I think, comes from the anxiety of the what ifs. There's all these what ifs. People ask, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And it doesn't matter what the question is. As soon as they say what if, I can interrupt them and give them the answer. And the answer is you solve it. Right? Well, what happens if you break down in the middle of Kansas? Or what happens if, you lose your train ticket in Japan? Well, that's the same thing as if someone says, well, what if the water heater breaks? Or, what if I get hail damage on my car? Like, you do it at home. You solve the situation that came up. You make a phone call, you get on the internet, you ask for help, or you figure out how to do it. I mean, it's no more additional challenges beyond what you have at home. They're just different challenges, but you can solve them, and everything is everywhere. People even ask things like, well, what happens if I start doing this and I don't like it? Well, then you go home. The thing about nomading is that nomading doesn't mean you're going to be in a certain amount of cities every single year, or that you're going to do this for a certain amount of time. The idea of nomading is that you don't have an end game planned for next month, that you can do anything or be anywhere that you're able to do, or that you want to do, or that you can make happen. We say we're never going to stop. That's actually probably not accurate. The more accurate statement is we have no intention of stopping today. The reality is if we decided tomorrow that we found some place that we never want to leave, then we would never leave that place. Like, we're not committed to traveling. It's just we probably don't think that's not our personalities. But there's no rule against it. So you try it. You don't like it, you leave. You're traveling around the country in an RV, going bing, 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 all these different places every single day, and then you find some beach that you love, and then you stay for 2 years. As long as the spirit is, I'm only staying in that place not for 2 years, but until I decide to leave, then you're nomading. Like, it's about not having those rules and restrictions and having the freedom. It's not about X amount of locations and X amount of time. So that you don't have to plan. I mean, you have to plan some things, but you don't have to plan all the details, get the ducks in a row. You can solve things as they come up, and the what ifs are all just solvable. All right. If you have any questions about nomading, post them in the comments.